So session two, we'll talk about navigating the workplace. I may talk briefly a little bit about that in my own experience of navigating a workplace as a person with low vision. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Conor Smith, and Conor is a project officer with Eye to the Future. And I'll hand over to Conor, who's going to tell you about his experiences about navigating the workplace.
Hello, everybody. Can I be heard? Am I
loud
muted?
And clear, Conor.
Awesome. Okay. Also, I just wanted to say hello, by the way. My name is Conor. I'm a project officer. I'm totally blind myself. I did want to mention too, there's a reason why some of us have our cameras turned off. That's because in the blindness workspace, I guess there sometimes isn't a lot of reason to have video cameras on. So just in case anyone was wondering why that was happening, but it does mean, maybe our hair doesn't need to be as styled as it usually needs to be or something otherwise, but just to fill you in with that. So also just to let you know, I use a screen reader, so if I just take a second to listen to the points that I want to raise, then that's all that's going on. So I'm just listening to that in my ear while I'm talking. So my section is about navigating the workplace. Now, all of this came from quite a big survey that was done by Vision Australia about employer, I guess, kind of potential issues with hiring people who may be blind or vision impaired. And one of them was cost, which Renee just alluded to. The other was safety, and the other was productivity, which you will be hearing about soon. So in terms of safety, I guess there's a misconception that, if you have people with disabilities, or particularly people who can't see in the workplace, that it's a time bomb waiting to happen or something like that. And the research really doesn't demonstrate this. I know myself from working in various blindness providers with lots of blind or vision impaired people around, that the incidents aren't any higher or lower than in any other workplace. But I guess it is a perception of perhaps people who wouldn't know otherwise, or who haven't come in contact with workers who are blind or vision impaired. So in terms of myself, when I'm navigating the workplace or trying to get a job, you're starting it at the interview stage. So for me, my own experience was, if I need to get to an interview, I find out whether it's a place that I can get to on my own already. Have I been there before? That's obviously not very likely, unless it's a very well-known place or establishment. So what I do is I make sure either I get dropped off by somebody who I know, or I get a taxi and find my way in using my cane or my guide dog. And sometimes that's just about finding your own way. I have several apps that allow me to get assistance in terms of direction and things like that. It just in that initial stage, because obviously when you are going somewhere all the time, you know more about it. But obviously for an interview, you're never going to potentially be there before, and that's what would happen. So for me, I do that. I make sure I get to the front desk, and then I ask for any assistance that I may or may not need. But a lot of times it's just me following along with whoever I need to follow, with either my guide dog or with my cane, into the room that we need to go into, finding a seat. And that's generally how that works. In terms of actually getting the job, this is where kind of more training kind of comes in. And again, this isn't anything on the employer. So when I get a job, I get in touch with either the Guide Dogs Association or a service provider like Vision Australia. I get in touch with their orientation and mobility services, and I say, I need to find out how to get from here to here. And then we go through the best way to break down that route. So whether that's catching the train or whatever it might be. And all of this is a situation and an agreement that's done between myself and that service provider. So there is no cost to the employer for me learning my way around. And in terms of the actual workplace itself, I also can get these people to show me how to navigate the workplace properly. So, okay, my desk is here. To the left of me over here, going around a corner, is the kitchen. The kettle is to the left-hand side of this kitchen, etc., etc. So that's been my experience of how I've actually, you know, navigated these places and where the hazards are, or even in terms of, you know, how do I evacuate from the building in an emergency, knowing where the fire escapes are, actually going down the fire escapes with these mobility instructors so that I can get out on time and I can kind of fulfill my safety responsibilities in terms of a WHS kind of setting. And yeah, as I said, navigating the workplace correctly. So finding out where the kitchens are, using the kettle, using the microwave, if those things are issues. Usually they're not, or not as much as people might think. And likewise, there are occupational therapists from those service providers I mentioned that can do the same. And again, that's no cost to any kind of employer. So for me, I've never really had any particular issues. I don't particularly know anybody who has, and I have worked in that space. The other thing that I guess happens is that when you're in an office, people potentially who haven't come in contact with someone who's blind or vision impaired think, you know, how do I navigate in a space with somebody who can't see? Is there going to be more collisions? How do I go about this? So there's a term called sighted guide, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. So if I need to go somewhere with a colleague that I haven't been before, naturally I can follow them. My guide dog is pretty good at following people. But likewise, sometimes what I do is I take somebody by the elbow and then I just follow along, and my cane does the rest of the work, or my dog does the rest of the work, but it's just in a unfamiliar setting maybe that I might not be aware of. But for the most part, that doesn't really happen all that often, but that's generally how it works. So there's no big safety concerns about it. There's no rigmarole or regulations or anything, but it's a pretty straightforward process. And I guess finally, before I open up to questions, if anybody has any, is I mentioned I have a guide dog, and seeing eye dogs and guide dogs, people can think, oh my God, we have a dog in the office. And for some people, that's an awesome thing. They love dogs. And other people might think, is there going to be accidents? Are they going to be loud? Is it going to be dirty? And that's not how it works. So particularly with guide dogs and seeing eye dogs, which are two different organizations, you know, one of the main briefs as a handler, as myself being a handler, is that I need to make sure she is always presentable as much as possible, because she is in the public. So she's always brushed as to the best of my ability. She's always clean. She's always groomed. You know, she has her own little bed. She has her own little bowl. I make sure the water bowl gets changed every day, so there isn't any stagnant water lying around. The bed gets washed at the end of every week to make sure there's no hair or any lingering smells. And while I'm at work during the day, she is tethered underneath my desk so that she's not roaming around, she's not wandering. And particularly with guide dogs and seeing eye dogs, they're so well trained that for the most part, none of them even bark. Like my guide dog in particular, she doesn't bark unless she's at the back door wanting to get in. And even then she lets out one bark and that's it. So it's very easy to think that there's not even a dog in the office. But, you know, that can be a thing that people think about. And yeah, and as I said, guide dogs instructors can come out and make sure that I have a place to go and toilet her on my lunch break, so I can go and find some grass, so that all of those kind of concerns are taken care of. It's not a safety issue or a cleanliness issue. So that's basically my little section. So again, I'm more than willing, if anybody has any questions about my own experiences in this area, or likewise to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you very much, Conor. Does anyone have any questions for Conor? I wanted to just add to that session that Conor's just done, that in my own experience as a person with low vision, working in a physical workspace, that the learnings from a safety perspective are slightly different for me. So I can navigate around a physical space almost as quickly as I navigate around my own home. But the education for me comes from letting my colleagues know that I'm a low vision person, which isn't always obvious because I don't use mobility aids. However, with someone with no peripheral vision, if doors are left half open or filing cabinet bottom drawers are left in the open position, or the top position for that matter, that can present me with a real hazard. So certainly in the last physical workspace that I had, there was some really great education done for the staff, because there was about 500 staff. Really great education provided about what it meant for me to be in the workplace without any peripheral vision, and the potential for accidents that could occur. And, you know, my experience was that my colleagues were wonderful and accepting and extremely helpful. I did have a couple of small accidents. We're all human, and sometimes we forget to do these things, and everyone's very understanding and as supportive as possible. So I think, you know, good communication is a really great key in navigating around what you need in the workplace, and that's just not for blindness or vision impairment, but for any disability at work.